Sometimes the kindest hearts beat in the emptiest homes, and sometimes the most unexpected angels wear leather jackets and ride motorcycles. This is the story of Jasmine Carter, a single mother who gave away her children's last meal to feed a hungry stranger, and how 150 Hell's Angels turned her world upside down in the most incredible way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 a.m., cutting through the thin walls of the cramped apartment like a knife. Jasmine Carter's eyes snapped open, her body already aching before her feet hit the cold linoleum floor. She moved quietly through the darkness, careful not to wake 6-year-old Lily and 3-year-old Mason, who were curled together on the worn couch that doubled as their bed. The apartment in Cedar Falls wasn't much, a single bedroom that Jasmine had given to her children while she slept on an air mattress in the living room corner. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like ugly flowers, and the heater coughed and wheezed when it worked at all. But it was home, and at $800 a month, it was all she could afford on her wages from the Blue Moon Diner. Jasmine pulled on her uniform, a faded blue dress with Jazz embroidered on the pocket, a nickname that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who used to dream of singing on stages instead of serving coffee to truckers and night shift workers. She caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror and winced. Dark circles shadowed her brown eyes, and her once bright smile had worn thin from too many double shifts and sleepless nights. The children stirred as she gathered her purse and keys. "Mommy!" Lily's voice was small and sleepy. "Shh, baby girl. Mommy's going to work. Mrs. Flores will check on you in a few hours, okay?" Jasmine knelt beside the couch, brushing Lily's dark curls from her forehead. "There's cereal in the kitchen for breakfast," but even as she said it, Jasmine's stomach twisted with guilt. She knew there wasn't much left, maybe 2 bowls worth of generic cornflakes, and barely enough milk to last through tomorrow. The food stamps wouldn't reload for another week, and after paying rent, utilities, and daycare, there was nothing left for groceries. The walk to the Blue Moon Diner took 20 minutes through streets that never seemed to sleep. Jasmine pulled her thin jacket tighter as October wind cut through the fabric. The diner sat on the corner of Main and Cedar, its neon sign flickering between Oppen and OP, the missing letters long since burned out. "You're late," grumbled Kenny Murphy, the owner, as Jasmine tied her apron around her waist. His belly strained against a grease-stained shirt, and his permanently scowled face made it clear he wasn't in the mood for excuses. "Sorry. Kenny, the bus was—" "I don't want to hear it. Jazz, table 6 needs their coffee refilled, and the guy at the counter's been waiting for his eggs for 10 minutes. He turned away, muttering something about unreliable single mothers under his breath. Jasmine bit back her response and grabbed the coffee pot. She'd learned long ago that fighting with Kenny would only cost her the job, and she couldn't afford to lose another one. This was her 3rd job in 8 months, and references were getting harder to come by. The morning rush blurred together in a haze of coffee refills, bacon grease, and demanding customers. A businessman snapped his fingers at her like she was a dog. A group of college kids left a mess of syrup and ketchup on their table with a $2 tip. An elderly woman complained that her eggs were too runny, then too hard, then not hot enough. By 2 p.m., Jasmine's feet were screaming in her second-hand shoes, and her lower back felt like someone had driven nails through her spine. But she couldn't stop. She had another shift starting at 6 p.m. at the all-night diner across town, a job that would keep her working until 2 a.m. 18 hours of work for maybe $120 in tips and wages, if she was lucky. During her short break, she called to check on the children. Lily answered the phone with her serious grown-up voice. "Hi, Mommy. Mason spilled his juice, but I cleaned it up. You're such a good big sister, baby. Is there enough food for lunch?" A pause. "I think so." "We shared the sandwich." Jasmine's heart clenched. She'd left 1 peanut butter and jelly sandwich for both children to split. "That's my smart girl. I'll bring something special home tonight, okay?" Another lie. There would be no special treat. There was barely enough money for bus fare home. The second shift at Murphy's all night was worse than the morning. The customers were rougher: truckers, night workers, people nursing hangovers or nursing heartbreak. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and the smell of old grease seemed to seep into her pores. Around midnight, she counted her tips. $37 and change. Combined with her wages, she might have enough for a few days of groceries, but not enough for both food and the overdue electricity bill. The shut-off notice was already taped to her door, giving her 3 days to pay or lose power. When her shift finally ended at 2 a.m., Jasmine's legs could barely carry her to the bus stop. The night air was bitter cold, and she pulled her jacket tighter as she waited for the last bus of the night. Her phone showed 2 missed calls from Mrs. Flores and a text: "Kids asking when you're coming home." Mason's been crying. The guilt hit her like a physical blow. Her babies were probably scared, wondering where their mother was, not understanding why she had to work so many hours just to keep them fed and housed. Lily, at 6 years old, was already taking care of her little brother, growing up too fast because her mother couldn't be there. The bus ride home felt endless. Jasmine stared out the dirty window at the empty streets, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Other mothers were tucked safely in bed with their families, not riding the late bus home from their second job of the day. Other children had both parents, stable homes, full refrigerators. She thought about her own mother, who died when Lily was just a baby. "Like you're stronger than you know, Jazz," her mom used to say. "Sometimes we have to bend so far we think we'll break, but we don't. We just learn how strong we really are." Right now, Jasmine felt closer to breaking than bending. The weight of responsibility, the constant worry about money, the exhaustion that went bone deep, it all pressed down on her like a mountain she couldn't climb. As the bus pulled up to her stop, she forced herself to straighten her shoulders. Whatever struggles she faced, her children would never doubt that they were loved. They would never go to bed wondering if their mother would fight for them. Even if she had to work herself to death, even if she had to go without so they could have something, she would never stop trying. The apartment was dark when she slipped inside, but she could hear Mason's small snores from the couch. She tiptoed over and adjusted their shared blanket, pressing gentle kisses to their foreheads. In the dim light, they looked so peaceful, so innocent. They deserved so much more than this cramped apartment and their perpetually exhausted mother. In the kitchen, she opened the nearly empty refrigerator. A carton of milk with maybe 2 glasses left. A jar of peanut butter scraped almost clean. Half a loaf of bread. Some wilted lettuce that should probably be thrown out. This was what she had to feed her children tomorrow. This and whatever miracle she could stretch from $37 in tip. Money. Jasmine sank into the one kitchen chair that wasn't, broken, and buried her face in her hands. The tears came silently, hot and bitter with frustration and fear. How had her life become this? How had love become so expensive and hope so hard to afford? Tomorrow would bring another double shift, another day of aching feet and demanding customers. Another day of choosing between paying bills and buying groceries, between being present for her children and keeping them housed. The cycle never seemed to end, only got harder. But as she sat there in the dark kitchen, listening to her children breathe safely in the next room, Jasmine made the same promise she made every night. Tomorrow somehow she would find a way. She would keep fighting, keep working, keep loving them with everything she had. She had no idea that in less than 24 hours, a hungry stranger would knock on her door and change everything forever. The next morning arrived too soon, dragging Jasmine from restless sleep with the familiar sound of Mason's crying. She stumbled from her air mattress, every muscle in her body protesting the motion. The apartment felt even colder than usual. The ancient heater had given up completely sometime during the night. "Mommy, Mason's hungry," Lily said, standing beside the couch in her faded pajamas. At 6 years old, she spoke with the careful responsibility of a child who'd learned to be the grown-up when the grown-ups weren't around. Jasmine's heart sank as she looked at her son. 3-year-old Mason sat on the couch, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks, his little hands pressed against his stomach. She scooped him up, feeling how light he'd become, how his ribs showed through his thin shirt. "I know, baby boy. Mommy's going to get you something to eat right now." But as she carried him to the kitchen, dread pooled in her stomach. She already knew what she'd find, or rather what she wouldn't find. The refrigerator hummed emptily, its shelves bare, except for the nearly empty milk carton and a single slice of bread that had seen better days. The cereal box sat hollow on the counter, not even crumbs left inside. Lily appeared beside her, tugging on her pajama pants. "Mommy, there's no breakfast." The simple statement hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Her 6-year-old shouldn't have to worry about whether there was food in the house. She shouldn't have to look at her mother with those big, understanding eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "I know, sweetheart. Mommy's going to figure something out." But even as she said it, Jasmine's mind raced through impossible calculations. She had $37 in tip money from last night, but the electricity bill demanded $45 by tomorrow, or they'd lose power. The bus fare to work would cost $6 round trip. Even if she skipped the electricity payment, $31 wouldn't stretch far enough to feed 3 people. Mason's crying grew louder, more desperate. The sound tore through Jasmine's chest like broken glass. She opened every cabinet, searching for something, anything she might have overlooked. A can of soup tucked behind old dishes, a forgotten box of crackers. Even stale cookies would be something. Nothing. She found herself staring into the empty pantry, her hands shaking with a mixture of rage and despair. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She worked 18 hours yesterday. 18 hours of serving ungrateful customers, cleaning tables, forcing smiles when all she wanted to do was cry. And for what? To come home to empty cabinets and hungry children? "Mommy?" Lily's voice was small, worried. "Are you okay?" Jasmine turned around, forcing her face into a calm expression she didn't feel. "Of course, baby girl. Mommy's just thinking." She knelt down to Lily's eye level, brushing a strand of dark hair from her daughter's face. "You know what? Let's play a game. A game?" Lily's eyes brightened slightly, though suspicion lingered there too. She'd learned not to trust when adults promised games during hard times. "Yes, it's called Adventure Breakfast. We're going to pretend we're explorers, and we have to find food in the wilderness." Jasmine's voice was bright, cheerful, completely at odds with the panic screaming in her head. "Can you help Mommy look for explorer food?" For the next 20 minutes, they explored the apartment. Jasmine managed to find a packet of crackers from a fast food restaurant stuffed in her purse, 3 packets of sugar she'd taken from the diner, and a small container of applesauce that had rolled under the couch. It wasn't much, maybe enough to quiet Mason's crying and give Lily something to chew on, but it would have to do. She divided the meager findings between her children, watching as they ate with the focused intensity of people who didn't know when their next meal might come. Mason clutched his crackers like treasure, breaking them into tiny pieces to make them last longer. Lily carefully shared her applesauce with her brother, giving him the bigger spoonfuls. Jasmine pretended to eat her portion, but instead slipped the crackers into Lily's hand when she wasn't looking. Her own stomach gnawed with hunger, but the sight of her children eating was better than any meal. While they ate their adventure breakfast, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a text from Kenny Murphy. "Need you in early today. 10 a.m. instead of noon. We're short-staffed." Earlier hours meant more tips, but it also meant leaving the children sooner. Jasmine glanced at the clock, 8:30 a.m. She had barely an hour to get ready and catch the bus. Mrs. Flores should be here soon, she told the children as she hurried to get dressed. Mrs. Flores was their elderly neighbor who watched the kids when Jasmine worked. She didn't charge much, just $10 a day, but she was kind and patient, treating Lily and Mason like the grandchildren she'd never had, as if summoned by her thoughts. A gentle knock came at the door. Mrs. Flores stood in the hallway, her gray hair neatly pinned and her warm brown eyes crinkling with concern. "Mija, you look tired," she said, stepping into the apartment. "These babies eating you breakfast?" Jasmine's throat tightened. "They're fine, Mrs. Flores. I just need to get to work." But the older woman's sharp eyes had already taken in the empty kitchen, the hollow look in Lily's face, the way Mason clung to his last cracker. She'd lived through enough hardship in her 70 years to recognize hunger when she saw it. "I brought some extra tortillas," Mrs. Flores said casually, pulling a warm bundle from her bag. "And maybe some beans I cooked too much of. You take some for later, see?" Tears pricked Jasmine's eyes. Mrs. Flores was on a fixed income herself, living on Social Security that barely covered her own needs. But she always seemed to have extra food when the Carter family was struggling. "Mrs. Flores, you don't have to—" "Bah!" The older woman waved her hand dismissively. "Is nothing. Food goes bad if nobody eats it." Jasmine hugged her quickly, afraid that if she held on too long, she might break down completely. "Thank you," she whispered. "Go to work, mija. I take good care of these angelitos." The bus ride to the diner felt longer than usual, every stop stretching Jasmine's nerves tighter. She stared out the window at families walking together, children with backpacks, heading to school after full breakfasts, mothers who didn't have to count crackers and pray for miracles. At the diner, the morning rush hit like a tidal wave. Kenny was in a particularly foul mood, snapping at everyone and complaining about everything from the coffee temperature to the way Jasmine wiped down tables. She bit her tongue and focused on the customers, forcing smiles and refilling coffee cups while calculating tips in her head. A trucker left $3 on a $15 breakfast. A businessman stiffed her completely after she brought him extra napkins and hot sauce. A young couple shared a single piece of pie and left a $1 tip on a table they occupied for 2 hours. By lunchtime, Jasmine had earned maybe $12 in tips. At this rate, she'd be lucky to clear $25 for the day. Not enough for groceries, not enough for the electric bill, not enough for anything that mattered. During her break, she called to check on the children. Mrs. Flores answered, her voice carefully neutral. "They're fine, mija. Playing quiet games. Did they eat the tortillas?" A pause. "See, they ate. Don't worry about nothing. You just work." But Jasmine could hear something in the older woman's voice, concern, maybe pity. It made her feel small and ashamed, like she was failing at the most basic job of motherhood, keeping her children fed. She hung up and stared at her reflection in the diner's bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, hollow-eyed, desperate, aging before her time. When had she become this person? When had survival become so hard that she celebrated finding crackers in her purse? Her phone showed a text from an unknown number. "Final notice. Electric service will be disconnected tomorrow at 5 p.m. without payment of $45 to $67. Jasmine closed her eyes and leaned against the bathroom wall. Tomorrow night, her children would be sitting in the dark, hungry and cold, while she worked another double shift trying to earn money that would never be enough. She thought about her mother's words again. Sometimes we have to bend so far we think we'll break, but we don't. Right now, Jasmine felt like she was past the bending point. She felt like she was already broken, just too stubborn or too scared to fall down. But for Lily and Mason, she would keep standing. She would keep fighting, even if she had to fight with empty hands and an empty stomach. She had no way of knowing that tonight, when she got home exhausted and discouraged, a stranger would appear at her door. A stranger who would look even hungrier than her children, and who would change the course of their lives forever. The rain started just as Jasmine's second shift ended at 1:47 a.m. She stood under the flickering neon sign of Murphy's All Night, watching water cascade from the broken gutters and pool in the cracked pavement. Her uniform was soaked through before she made it to the bus stop, and the November wind cut through her thin jacket like ice. The late bus was nearly empty. Just her, a sleeping homeless man, and a woman who kept glancing nervously at every shadow. Jasmine pressed her forehead against the cold window and counted the day's earnings. $28.37. After bus fare, she'd have $22 to her name. Still not enough for the electric bill, still not enough for real groceries. By the time she reached her street, the rain had turned to a miserable sleet that stung her face and made walking treacherous. She hurried past the broken streetlights, past Mrs. Chen's darkened grocery store, past the vacant lot where teenagers sometimes gathered to cause trouble. All she wanted was to check on her sleeping children and collapse onto her air mattress. She was fumbling with her keys in the dim hallway when she heard it. A soft thud from somewhere nearby, followed by a low groan. Jasmine froze, listening. Another sound, like someone struggling to stand. "Hello!" She called softly, not wanting to wake the whole building, but unable to ignore what she'd heard. Silence. Then, from the shadows near the stairwell, a weak voice. "Sorry, didn't mean to. I'll move along." Jasmine's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she saw him. A man, maybe in his 30s, slumped against the wall near the building's entrance. Even in the dim light, she could see he was soaked through. His dark hair plastered to his head, his clothes hanging loose on a frame that looked like it hadn't seen a decent meal in weeks. Every instinct told her to hurry inside, lock the door and pretend she hadn't seen anything. This was Cedar Falls after midnight. Nothing good happened on these streets when the sun went down. But something about the way he'd apologized, the defeat in his voice, made her pause. "Are you hurt?" she found herself asking. The man looked up, and she could see his face more clearly. Stubbled cheeks hollow with hunger, eyes that held a familiar exhaustion she recognized from her own mirror. But there was something else there too, a gentleness that didn't match his rough appearance. "No, Mom, just catching my breath. I'll be gone in a minute." "You're soaked," Jasmine said, stating the obvious. "How long have you been out here?" He tried to push himself up straighter against the wall. "Couple hours, maybe. Bus broke down about 10 miles out, and I've been walking since." His stomach chose that moment to growl audibly. A sound so loud and desperate that it made Jasmine's own empty stomach clench in sympathy. "When did you last eat?" The question came out before she could stop it. The man, she could see now that he wore a worn leather jacket with patches she couldn't quite make out in the darkness, hesitated. "Yesterday morning, I think. Maybe the day before." Hard to keep track, Jasmine's heart clenched. She knew that feeling, that disorientation that came with real hunger. She knew the way time became meaningless when you were counting hours between meals instead of planning them. "Look, he started, then stopped. "I don't want to bother nobody. I got a buddy supposed to pick me up, but his phone's going straight to voicemail. I just need somewhere to wait out this rain." Common sense screamed at her to go inside. She didn't know this man. He could be dangerous, could be lying, could be any number of things that would put her and her children at risk. But looking at him, really looking, she saw something that overrode her fear. She saw herself. She saw the same bone-deep exhaustion, the same pride fighting against desperation, the same look of someone who'd been knocked down so many times that standing up had become an act of pure defiance. "What's your name?" she asked. "Rex," he said after a moment. "Rex Williams. Though most folks call me Phoenix." "Phoenix?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Long story." "What about you?" "Jasmine, Jazz." She looked at him for another long moment, weighing risks against conscience. "Phoenix, I don't have much, but I've got a couch you could sit on while you wait for your friend. And maybe something warm to drink." His eyes widened with surprise, then something that might have been relief. "Ma'am, I couldn't. I appreciate the offer, but nothing," Jasmine said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "It's freezing out here, and you're wet through. Come on." She unlocked her door and stepped inside, leaving it open behind her. After a moment's hesitation, she heard his footsteps following. In the dim light of her living room, she could see him more clearly. The leather jacket was old but well-maintained, with patches that looked like they meant something. His boots were worn down to almost nothing, and his jeans had holes that weren't fashionable. They were from necessity, but it was his face that caught her attention. Beneath the exhaustion and hunger, there was kindness there. Gentle eyes that took in her sparse apartment without judgment, that lingered on the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator with a soft expression. "You got kids," he said, "and it wasn't a question. 2, they're sleeping." Jasmine gestured toward the couch where Lily and Mason lay curled under their shared blanket, faces peaceful in sleep. Phoenix's expression grew even softer. "They're beautiful," he whispered, careful to keep his voice low. "How old?" "Lily's 6, Mason's 3. Jasmine found herself moving toward the kitchen, her mother's voice echoing in her head. "Always offer food to someone who's hungry. Always offer shelter to someone who's cold. Let me make you some coffee," she said, then stopped. She'd forgotten there was no coffee, no tea. Nothing warm except tap water, and the few packets of hot chocolate she'd been saving for the children's weekend treat. Phoenix seemed to sense her hesitation. "Ma'am, Jazz, I don't need nothing fancy. Just somewhere dry to sit for a few minutes." But Jasmine was already moving, making a decision that her practical mind said was foolish. She grabbed the packets of hot chocolate and the last of the milk from the refrigerator. 2 packets would make 1 decent cup. The children could share the remaining packet tomorrow. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to the kitchen chair. "This'll just take a minute." As she heated water on the stove, she was acutely aware of Phoenix looking around her apartment. She wondered what he saw. The water stains on the ceiling, the second-hand furniture, the careful way everything was arranged to hide how little they had. She wondered if he could tell that the decorations on the walls were made from construction paper and dollar store supplies. That the dining set was actually a folding table and mismatched chairs from a thrift store. "You work nights?" he asked, noticing her diner uniform. "Days and nights," Jasmine said, stirring the hot chocolate. "2 jobs. 3 kids to feed, you know how it is. 3 kids?" She realized her mistake. 2 kids. I meant 2. But the slip revealed more than she'd intended, how she sometimes felt like the 3rd child in her own family. Needing care and comfort she couldn't provide for herself, she handed him the mug, watching as he wrapped his hands around it like it was the most precious thing in the world. He took a sip and closed his eyes, and for a moment the exhaustion seemed to lift from his face. This is perfect," he said. "Thank you." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the rain against the windows and the children's soft breathing from the couch. Jasmine found herself studying Phoenix more closely. Despite his rough appearance, there was something trustworthy about him. The way he held the mug carefully, like he understood its value. The way his eyes kept drifting to the children with protective concern, rather than anything that made her nervous. "So what brings you to Cedar Falls at 1 in the morning?" she asked. Phoenix smiled, and it transformed his face completely. "Heading home from a motorcycle rally in Austin. Group of us were riding back together, but my bike broke down about 50 miles out. The others went ahead to get help, and I was supposed to wait for a tow truck." He shrugged. "Tow truck never came. Started walking when it got too cold to stand still. Motorcycle rally." Jasmine looked at his jacket again, trying to make out the patches in the dim light. "Yeah, brotherhood thing. We do charity rides, toy drives, that kind of stuff." He seemed to hesitate, then added, "We're not exactly what most people expect when they think of bikers." Jasmine thought about that. She'd had her own share of being judged by appearances. The single mom, working multiple jobs, living in the rough part of town. People made assumptions about her character, her choices, her worth as a human being, based on where she lived and how much money she didn't have. "People see what they want to see," she said. "Doesn't mean they're seeing the truth." Phoenix looked at her with something like gratitude. "Exactly." His phone buzzed and he pulled it from his pocket with obvious relief. "Finally," he muttered, then answered. "Tommy, man, where you been?" Jasmine could hear a voice on the other end, excited and apologetic. Phoenix listened, nodding. "Yeah, I'm okay. I'm in Cedar Falls, near the bus depot." He looked at Jasmine questioningly, and she quietly gave him her address. 204 Maple Street. "Yeah, I can wait a few more minutes." "No, I'm somewhere warm. I'll explain when you get here." "You're not in my hair," Jasmine said, and meant it. "I'm glad you're getting help." They talked quietly while they waited, about the children, about work, about the way life had a habit of knocking people down when they were already struggling. Phoenix told her about the charity work his group did, about how they'd started, because so many of them had been helped by strangers when they needed it most. "We call it paying it forward," he said. "Someone shows you kindness when you're at your lowest, and you spend the rest of your life trying to pass that on." Jasmine thought about Mrs. Flores and her extra tortillas, about the small kindnesses that had kept her family afloat when everything else was falling apart. When headlights swept across the window, Phoenix stood reluctantly. "That'll be Tommy." He drained the last of his hot chocolate and set the mug carefully on the table. "Jazz, I can't thank you enough. You saved my life tonight." "It was just hot chocolate," Jasmine said, but Phoenix shook his head. "It was more than that. It was kindness when you didn't have to give it. Trust when you had every reason not to." He looked toward the children, still sleeping peacefully. "You're raising them right. They're lucky to have you." As he headed toward the door, Jasmine felt an odd sadness. Phoenix had brought a warmth to her apartment that had nothing to do with the hot chocolate, a reminder that there were still good people in the world. That kindness wasn't dead even in the hardest places. "Phoenix," she called softly as he reached for the door handle. He turned back. "Be safe out there." He smiled. "You too, Jazz. You too." The door closed behind him, and Jasmine was alone again with her sleeping children and her empty apartment. She didn't know it yet, but in 12 hours, Phoenix would be back. And he wouldn't be alone. Jasmine woke to Mason's screaming at 6:30 a.m., her body protesting every movement as she rolled off the deflated air mattress. The hot chocolate incident had used up the last of their milk, and there was nothing left for breakfast except half a sleeve of saltine crackers she'd found buried in a kitchen drawer. "Hungry, Mommy." "Hungry," Mason wailed, his little fists rubbing his eyes as tears streamed down his face. At 3 years old, he didn't understand why his stomach hurt or why there wasn't food when he needed it. He only knew the gnawing emptiness that made him cry. Lily sat up on the couch, her dark hair a tangled mess, but her eyes already alert and worried. "Is Mason okay?" "He's just hungry, baby girl." Jasmine lifted Mason into her arms, feeling how light he'd gotten. His ribs were visible through his thin pajama shirt, and his cheeks had lost their baby roundness. "We're all hungry." She divided the crackers between the children, 4 for Lily, 3 for Mason, and pretended to eat one while actually slipping it back to Lily when Mason wasn't looking. The children ate slowly, savoring each bite like it might be their last, Mommy's tummies making growling sounds. Lily observed with the brutal honesty of a 6-year-old. Jasmine's stomach had been cramping with hunger for the past 2 days, but she forced a smile. "Mommy's fine, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-up tummies just make funny noises, but she wasn't fine." The exhaustion went beyond tired now. It was the bone-deep weariness that came from working 18-hour days on empty stomachs and 3 hours of sleep. Her hands shook when she tried to pour water, and dark spots danced at the edges of her vision when she stood up too quickly. The electricity bill notice glared at her from the kitchen counter. "Final notice. Service will be disconnected today at 5 p.m. without payment of $45.67, 5 o'clock. She'd be at work when they came to shut off the power, which meant the children would be here in the dark, scared and confused. While Mrs. Flores tried to explain why the lights wouldn't turn on, Jasmine checked her phone, one missed call from Kenny Murphy, and a text that made her stomach drop even further. "Health inspector coming today. Need everyone in early for deep clean. Be here by 9 a.m. or don't bother coming in. 9 a.m. It was already 7:15, and the bus took 45 minutes when it was running on time. She had to leave in the next 20 minutes or risk losing the job entirely. Mrs. Flores should be here soon, she told the children. But even as she said it, she remembered that Mrs. Flores had mentioned a doctor's appointment this morning. In her exhaustion, she'd forgotten to arrange backup childcare. Panic clawed at her chest. She couldn't leave Lily and Mason alone, but she couldn't afford to miss work either. Not today, not with the electricity bill hanging over them like a sword. Her phone rang. "Mrs. Flores, Mija, I'm so sorry. My doctor moved my appointment to this morning, and I can't reschedule. Is there someone else who can watch the babies?" Jasmine closed her eyes. It's okay, Mrs. Flores, I'll figure something out, but there was no one else. No family, no friends who weren't working their own survival jobs, no money for a babysitter. She looked at Lily, who was trying to comfort Mason with a lullaby their grandmother used to sing, and made the only decision she could. "Lily, baby, can you be Mommy's big helper today?" Lily's face grew serious. "What do you need me to do?" "I have to go to work, but Mrs. Flores can't come until later. Can you watch Mason for just a few hours? Keep him safe and quiet." At 6 years old, Lily had already learned to be more responsible than most adults. She nodded solemnly. "I can do it, Mommy. I'll take good care of him." Jasmine's heart broke a little more. "I'll leave my phone number with Mrs. Chen downstairs. If anything happens, anything at all, you go straight to her, okay?" She gave Lily what little remained of their emergency money, $3, and strict instructions about not opening the door for anyone, not touching the stove, and keeping Mason away from the windows. Then she kissed both children goodbye, hating herself for what she was about to do. The bus ride to work felt like a journey to hell. Every minute that passed was another minute her babies were alone, hungry and vulnerable. Jasmine stared out the window at families walking together, children heading to school with full backpacks and full bellies, mothers who didn't have to choose between keeping their jobs and keeping their children safe. At the diner, the health inspector turned out to be a thin woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard who found fault with everything. Kenny was in a rage, screaming at everyone and threatening to dock pay for every violation she noted. Jasmine scrubbed floors, cleaned equipment and reorganized storage areas, while her mind stayed with Lily and Mason, alone in that cold apartment. During her break, she called to check on them. Lily answered on the first ring. "Hi, Mommy, we're okay. Mason's sleeping, and I'm reading him the picture book about the bunny. Are you hungry, baby?" A pause. A little. "But we're okay." Jasmine knew that pause. Lily was protecting her, trying not to worry her, the way children do when they understand their parents are already carrying too much. "I'll be home as soon as I can, sweetheart. You're being so brave." The lunch rush was particularly brutal. Jasmine's hands shook from hunger and exhaustion as she carried heavy trays, and twice she had to grip the counter to steady herself when dizziness hit. But she pushed through, focusing on the tips, on the small pile of dollars that just might, be enough to keep the lights on. By 3 p.m., she'd earned $31 in tips. Combined with what she had at home, it was still $8 short of the electric bill, but maybe she could negotiate a payment plan. Maybe they'd give her one more day. She was calculating and recalculating when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Is this Jazz? The lady who helped Phoenix last night?" Jasmine frowned. How had someone gotten her number? Phoenix must have given it to them, but why? She texted back, "Yes, who is this?" The response came immediately. "This is Tommy, Phoenix's friend. He told me what you did for him. We're coming by your place in about an hour. Phoenix has something for you." Alarm bells went off in Jasmine's head. She didn't know these people. What if Phoenix had told them about her apartment, about the children being alone? What if this was some kind of setup? She texted back, "I'm at work. Maybe another time. Don't worry. Phoenix just wants to thank you properly." 1 hour? Jasmine's shift wasn't supposed to end until 5 p.m., but she couldn't concentrate on anything except getting home to her children. She approached Kenny during a lull. "I need to leave a little early today." "Family emergency." Kenny's face darkened. "Emergency? You've been here 6 hours, and now you got an emergency. My kids? I don't want to hear about your kids, Jazz. You leave early. You don't get paid for the full shift. And don't expect to pick up extra hours this week." Jasmine bit back her response. She needed every dollar, but she needed to get home more. "I understand." She left at 4:15, her day's earnings reduced to $28. Still not enough for the electric bill, still not enough for groceries, but at least she'd be home before these strangers arrived. The bus couldn't move fast enough. Jasmine pressed her face to the window, watching the familiar streets crawl by, while anxiety ate at her stomach. She should never have helped Phoenix. It had been stupid, reckless, the kind of decision that put her children at risk. But even as she thought it, she remembered his kind eyes, the gentle way he'd looked at Lily and Mason. the genuine gratitude in his voice. Phoenix hadn't seemed dangerous. He'd seemed lost, like her. She reached her building at 4:45 p.m., taking the stairs, 2 at a time. Her hands were shaking as she unlocked the apartment door. Lily! Mason? Mommy! Lily appeared from the kitchen, Mason toddling behind her. Both children rushed into Jasmine's arms, and she held them tightly, breathing in their familiar scent of baby shampoo and innocence. Were you good for each other? Yes, Mommy. Mason was crying because he was hungry, but I sang to him and he felt better. Jasmine's heart clenched. Her 3-year-old son had been crying from hunger while she scrubbed floors for tips that still weren't enough. She was failing them. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how many sacrifices she made, it wasn't enough. A rumble outside caught her attention. The deep, throaty sound of motorcycles. Multiple motorcycles. Jasmine moved to the window and looked down at the street. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just Phoenix and one friend. There were motorcycles lining the entire block. Dozens of them. Big chrome-covered machines, with riders in leather jackets and more arriving every minute. As she watched, Phoenix climbed off a massive black bike and looked up at her building. Even from 3 stories up, she could see his smile. He raised his hand in a friendly wave, then started walking toward the entrance. Behind him, other riders began dismounting. Men and women in leather and denim, their bikes gleaming in the afternoon sun. They moved with purpose, but not the kind that suggested trouble. They looked organized, like they were there for a reason. Jasmine's phone buzzed. We're here. Phoenix is coming up, her heart hammered against her ribs. What had she done? What had her moment of kindness set in motion? A gentle knock came at her door, and Phoenix's voice called softly, Jazz, it's Phoenix. Can we talk for a minute? Lily and Mason clung to her legs, sensing her tension. Jasmine looked through the peephole and saw Phoenix standing alone in the hallway, his hands visible and empty, his expression patient and kind, against every instinct screaming at her to keep the door locked. She opened it. Phoenix smiled. Hey, Jazz, hope you don't mind us stopping by. Phoenix, There are a lot of motorcycles outside. Yeah, about that. His expression grew serious. I told my brothers what you did for me last night. How you fed a stranger when you barely had anything for yourself. How you trusted me when you had every reason not to. It was just hot chocolate. No, Phoenix interrupted gently. It was more than that. And when I told them the rest? Phoenix's eyes grew sad. About the empty kitchen. About you working yourself to death to feed these babies. About the electricity bill I saw on your counter. He paused. Jazz, my brothers and I, we've been where you are. We know what it's like to choose between paying bills and eating. We know what it's like to feel like you're drowning and nobody cares. Jasmine felt tears, threatening. Phoenix, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice was gentle but firm. You saved my life last night. Not just from the cold and rain, but from losing faith that good people still exist. And now we want to return the favor. He gestured toward the window. Those people down there, they're my family. And when family needs help, we show up. All of us. Jasmine looked past him toward the stairs, where she could hear footsteps, multiple sets of them, coming up slowly and quietly. Phoenix, what did you do? Before Phoenix could answer, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the stairwell. Not threatening or aggressive, but purposeful, measured, like a military unit moving with precision and respect. Jazz, Phoenix said softly, I need you to trust me one more time. Can you do that? Jasmine looked down at Lily and Mason, who were pressed against her legs, wide-eyed and silent. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to slam the door and barricade it. But Phoenix's eyes held the same gentleness they'd shown the night before, the same respect and gratitude that had made her trust him in the first place. How many people are coming up here? She whispered. Just a few. The rest are staying outside. Phoenix glanced back toward the stairs. Jazz, we're not here to scare you or your kids. We're here because what you did last night. It meant something. And we take care of people who take care of us. The footsteps stopped just outside her door. Phoenix turned and nodded to someone she couldn't see, then looked back at her. Jazz, I'd like you to meet Dante Brooks. We call him Iron. He's our chapter president." A man stepped into view and Jasmine's breath caught. He was massive, easily 6'4", with shoulders that filled the hallway. His leather jacket was covered in patches, and his graying beard was neatly trimmed. But it was his eyes that surprised her. They were kind, almost grandfatherly, with deep smile lines that spoke of someone who laughed often. "Mom," he said, his voice deep but gentle. He removed a baseball cap, revealing salt and pepper hair. "I'm Dante. Phoenix told us what you did for him last night. I gave him hot chocolate." "No, ma'am, you did more than that." Dante's expression grew serious. "You opened your door to a stranger in the middle of the night. You fed someone who was hungry when you barely had food for your own children. You showed kindness when the world had given you every reason to be hard." Behind Dante, two more figures appeared. A woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a leather jacket over clean jeans. Beside her, a younger man with gentle eyes and careful movements. "This is Sandra, we call her Silver, and that's Marcus," Dante continued. "They wanted to meet the woman who reminded us why we do what we do." Sandra stepped forward, her expression warm. "Honey, Phoenix told us about your babies, about how hard you're working." Her voice carried a maternal authority that immediately put Jasmine at ease. "We've been there. Most of us have been exactly where you are." "I don't understand," Jasmine said. "What do you want?" Dante and Phoenix exchanged a look. Then Dante smiled, a real smile that transformed his intimidating appearance completely. "We want to show you what happens when kindness comes back around." He gestured toward the stairs. "Phoenix, why don't you bring up the first load?" "First load of what?" Jasmine asked, but Phoenix was already heading downstairs. "Ma'am," Dante said, "would it be okay if we came in for just a minute? I know this is overwhelming, but I think it'll make more sense if we can talk properly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Jasmine looked at Lily and Mason, then back at these leather-clad strangers who spoke with respect and kindness. Against all logic, she stepped aside. "Thank you," Sandra said as they entered. She immediately knelt down to Lily and Mason's level. "Hi there, sweethearts. What are your names?" "I'm Lily, and this is Mason," Lily said with her careful politeness. "Are you friends of Mommy's?" "We're friends of Phoenix's," Sandra said gently. "And Phoenix told us your mommy is one of the nicest people he's ever met." The sound of footsteps on the stairs grew louder, and Phoenix reappeared in the doorway. But he wasn't alone, and he wasn't empty-handed. Behind him came a line of bikers, each carrying grocery bags, boxes, and bundles. They moved quietly, respectfully, setting their loads on Jasmine's kitchen table and counters without being asked. "What? What is this?" Jasmine stammered. The first biker, a man with a grey ponytail, set down 2 large grocery bags. "Heard you might need some supplies, ma'am." A woman with intricate tattoos covering her arms placed a box of children's clothes on the couch. "These are from my grandkids. They outgrew them, but they're still good." Another man, younger with kind eyes, set down what appeared to be a small cooler. "Fresh milk, eggs, bread." The basics, they kept coming, one after another, filing into her small apartment like a steady stream of leather-clad Santa Clauses. They brought groceries, real groceries, not just staples, but good food. Fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, pasta, cereal, snacks for the children. They brought clothing in Lily and Mason's sizes. They brought toys, books, even a small television to replace the broken one in the corner. Jasmine stood frozen in the middle of it all, watching her empty apartment transform before her eyes. The kitchen table groaned under the weight of food. The counters disappeared beneath boxes and bags. Her living room began to look like a family lived there, instead of just survived there. I can't, she started, but the words wouldn't come. Sandra appeared beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Honey, just breathe. This is what we do, but why? You don't even know me." "We know enough," Dante said firmly. "We know you work 2 jobs to feed your babies. We know you give food to strangers when you don't have enough for yourself. We know you're doing everything right in a world that keeps knocking you down." Phoenix approached, carrying something carefully in his hands. "Jazz, there's something else." He handed her an envelope. "Heavy, thick, sealed. What's this?" "Open it." With shaking hands, Jasmine tore open the envelope. Inside were bills, 20s, 50s, hundreds. More money than she'd seen in her entire life. She tried to count it, but her vision blurred with tears. "How much?" "Enough for your electric bill," Phoenix said quietly. "Enough for rent for the next few months. Enough to give you some breathing room. I can't take this." The words came out as a whisper. "This is too much." "I can't." "Yes, you can," Sandra said firmly. "Because that's what family does. And like it or not, honey, you're family now." The apartment had gone quiet except for the children's awed whispers as they explored the toys and books that had appeared. Jasmine looked around at these strangers, these intimidating leather-clad bikers who had just filled her empty home with abundance. "I don't understand," she said again. "People are afraid of you. They cross the street when they see you coming. Why would you do this for someone like me?" Marcus, the younger man, spoke for the first time. "Because someone like you saved my life once. Gave me food when I was hungry, shelter when I was cold. Showed me that kindness still existed when I thought the world had forgotten how to care. We've all been there," Sandra added. "Rock bottom, nowhere to turn, convinced we were invisible. And someone, usually someone who had their own struggles, reached out and reminded us we were human." Dante nodded. "Most people see the jackets, the bikes, the tattoos, and they think we're trouble. They don't see that we're fathers and mothers, grandparents and workers. They don't see that we're just people who've learned that sometimes the only family you can count on is the one you choose." Phoenix knelt down beside Lily and Mason, who were examining a small stuffed elephant with wonder. "Your mom is special, you know that? She has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. She takes care of us," Lily said seriously. "Even when she's tired. I know she does, sweetheart. And now we're going to help take care of all of you." Jasmine felt the tears finally spill over. Not tears of shame or desperation, but tears of overwhelming gratitude and disbelief. In the space of an hour, these strangers had transformed not just her apartment, but her entire world. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me?" Dante's expression grew soft. "Because you proved something we always believed, but sometimes forget. That goodness still exists. That there are still people willing to give their last cup of hot chocolate to a stranger in need." Sandra wrapped an arm around Jasmine's shoulders. "On, because we remember what it feels like to be where you are. We remember what it means when someone shows up just when you think you can't take another step." Outside, the rumble of motorcycles continued. More arrivals, more members of this unexpected family coming to meet the woman who had reminded them why they did this work. "How many of you are there?" Jasmine asked. Phoenix grinned. "In our chapter?" "About 40. But word's been spreading. Chapters from 3 counties over heard about this. By tomorrow," he shrugged. "Could be over 100 bikes in your neighborhood." Jasmine's eyes widened. 100? "Give or take," Dante said with a chuckle. "We like to make an impression," as if to prove his point. The rumble outside grew louder. More engines, more voices, more of this brotherhood that had descended on Cedar Falls like a leather-clad army of generosity. Jasmine looked around her transformed apartment, at her children playing happily with new toys, at these intimidating strangers who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than she'd experienced in years. For the first time since her mother died, she didn't feel alone. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was drowning. And for the first time in her adult life, she understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than survival. But even as gratitude overwhelmed her, she had no idea that this was just the beginning. Outside, more motorcycles were arriving every minute, and word was spreading through the biker community like wildfire. By tomorrow, the story of the single mother who fed a hungry stranger would reach every corner of the state, and they would all want to meet her. By evening, the transformation was complete. Jasmine's refrigerator was stuffed with food, her pantry overflowing with supplies that would last months. Lily and Mason had eaten their first real meal in weeks. Grilled cheese sandwiches made with actual cheese and butter, served with fresh milk and apple slices. They'd gone to bed early, exhausted from the excitement, and finally, blessedly full. The bikers had been respectful about leaving once the initial deliveries were made. Only Phoenix, Dante, Sandra, and Marcus remained, sitting around Jasmine's small kitchen table, sharing coffee and quiet conversation. For the first time in years, Jasmine felt like she had friends, real friends who understood struggle and chose kindness anyway. That's when the pounding started. 3 sharp, aggressive knocks that rattled the door in its frame. "Open up! Landlord inspection!" Mr. Brennan's voice boomed through the thin walls, loud enough to wake the children. Jasmine's blood ran cold. He wasn't supposed to be here. He'd never done a landlord inspection before, especially not at 8 p.m. on a weeknight. Dante's expression darkened immediately. "Who's that?" "My landlord," Jasmine whispered, her stomach dropping. "Mr. Brennan, he's not a nice man." The pounding came again, more aggressive this time. "I know you're in there, Carter. Open this door right now." From the bedroom came the sound of Mason crying, startled awake by the shouting. Lily's small voice followed. "Mommy!" "What's happening?" Phoenix stood up, his jaw tight. "What's this guy's problem?" "He's been looking for reasons to evict us," Jasmine said quietly. "The rent's always on time, but he says we're undesirable tenants, single mother, kids making noise." She trailed off, but they all understood. Sandra's eyes flashed with anger. "He's harassing you." Another round of pounding, followed by Brennan's voice. "I saw all those motorcycles. You're running some kind of operation out of my building." "This is a decent neighborhood." Marcus shook his head in disgust. "Decent neighborhood?" "Right." Jasmine looked around at her friends, because that's what they were now, friends, and felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. Not just gratitude, but strength. For the first time since her mother died, she wasn't facing a bully alone. "What should I do?" she asked. Dante stood slowly, his imposing frame filling the small kitchen. "Answer the door. We'll be right behind you." "I don't want trouble." "There won't be any trouble," Sandra said firmly. "But this man needs to learn some manners." Jasmine walked to the door, her friends flanking her like guardian angels in leather jackets. She took a deep breath and opened it. Mr. Brennan stood in the hallway, his face red with anger and righteousness. He was a thin man in his 50s, with greasy hair and a perpetual sneer that made him look like he'd been sucking on lemons. Behind him stood 2 other men, his brother Kyle and their cousin Dennis, both equally unpleasant specimens who acted as his unofficial enforcers. "About time," Brennan snarled, then stopped short when he saw the figures behind Jasmine. His eyes widened as he took in Dante's massive frame, Sandra's steely expression, and the obvious solidarity of the group. "Mr. Brennan," Jasmine said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "What can I do for you?" Brennan recovered quickly, puffing up his chest. "I'm here about the disturbance. All those motorcycles, all that noise. This is a family building, and I won't have criminal activity." "Criminal activity." Dante stepped forward, and Brennan actually took a step back. "What criminal activity would that be?" Well, the motorcycles are legally parked on a public street," Phoenix interjected smoothly. "Is there a law against motorcycles in this neighborhood?" Brennan's face grew redder. "Don't get smart with me. I know what you people are up to. Drug dealing, gang activity." "Mr. Brennan." Sandra's voice cut through his rant like ice. "I'm going to stop you right there before you say something really stupid." She stepped into the hallway, and despite being barely 5'6", her presence was commanding. "We're members of the Iron Brotherhood Motorcycle Club. We do charity work. We help families in need. We volunteer at children's hospitals and organize toy drives. I don't care what you call yourselves." "What we call ourselves," Marcus said quietly, "is people who don't tolerate bullies." The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brennan looked between the 4 bikers, then back at Jasmine, his confidence wavering. This woman is behind on her electric bill. She's not fit to be a tenant. Her electric bill is paid," Dante said flatly. "In full. Is there anything else?" Brennan blinked. "What?" "The electric bill. It's paid. So unless you have some other legitimate complaint, and I mean legitimate, not just harassment because you don't like single mothers, I suggest you move along. You can't. I don't have to, Brennan sputtered, looking to his companions for support. But Kyle and Dennis were staring at the bikers with obvious nervousness, clearly not eager to escalate this confrontation. Phoenix pulled out his phone. "Would you like me to call the police? I'm sure they'd be interested to hear about a landlord conducting aggressive inspections at 8 p.m., disturbing sleeping children and making false accusations. Or," Sandra added sweetly, "we could call the housing authority. I bet they'd love to hear about harassment tactics and discrimination against single mothers." Brennan's face went from red to pale in seconds. The housing authority was the last thing any slumlord wanted to deal with. "This isn't over," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of him. "Oh, but it is," Dante said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this family alone. You're going to stop looking for excuses to evict them. You're going to act like the professional landlord you're supposed to be instead of the bully you actually are. And if you don't," Marcus added, "you'll be dealing with us, all of us." As if summoned by his words, the rumble of motorcycles filled the street below. More members arriving, drawn by word that their newest family member was being harassed. Brennan looked toward the stairs, hearing the sound of boots and voices. More bikers were coming up, curious about the confrontation. "How many of you are there?" he whispered. "In this building." "Right now," Dante pretended to think. "Maybe a dozen." "In the neighborhood." 50, 60. "But we've got friends coming in from other chapters tomorrow. Should be quite a gathering." Sandra smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We take care of our own, Mr. Brennan, and Jasmine is ours now." The sound of footsteps on the stairs grew louder. More leather jackets, more solidarity, more people who understood what it meant to stand together against bullies. Brennan looked around wildly, realizing he was vastly outnumbered and completely outmatched. These weren't the teenagers he was used to intimidating. These were adults who'd faced real hardship and learned to fight back. "Come on," he muttered to Kyle and Dennis. "Let's go." They retreated down the hallway like the cowards they were, Brennan throwing one last venomous look over his shoulder. "This isn't legal. You can't just take over a building." "We're not taking over anything," Phoenix called after him. "We're just visiting a friend. It's a free country, isn't it?" As their footsteps faded down the stairs, Jasmine felt something shift inside her chest. For years, she'd lived in fear of men like Brennan. She'd accepted his harassment, his threats, his attempts to make her feel small and powerless. She'd believed she had to endure it because she had nowhere else to go. But tonight, she hadn't faced him alone. Tonight, she'd had backup, real backup, from people who saw her worth and refused to let anyone diminish it. "He'll be back," she said quietly. "Maybe," Dante acknowledged, "but he won't be coming alone either. And neither will you." Sandra wrapped an arm around Jasmine's shoulders. "Honey, you don't understand yet. This isn't just about tonight. This is about forever. You're family now, and family looks out for each other." More bikers appeared at the top of the stairs, men and women who'd heard about the confrontation and come to offer support. They didn't ask questions, didn't need explanations. They just stood there, a wall of solidarity that said louder than words, "You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us." From the bedroom, Lily's voice called out softly, "Mommy, is everything okay?" Jasmine looked around at her unlikely protectors, at these leather-clad angels who'd transformed her life in a single day, and smiled. "Everything's perfect, baby girl," she called back. "Go back to sleep." And for the first time in years, she meant it. Everything really was perfect. Not because her problems were solved. There would always be bills, always be struggles, always be people like Brennan who preyed on the vulnerable. But she wasn't vulnerable anymore. She wasn't alone anymore. She was part of something bigger, something stronger, something that refused to let good people suffer in silence. Outside, the rumble of motorcycles continued as more chapters arrived to meet the woman who'd reminded them all why they did this work. By tomorrow, there would be over 100 bikers in Cedar Falls, all because one exhausted single mother had shared her last cup of hot chocolate with a stranger. The ripple effects of kindness were just beginning. 3 weeks later, Jasmine Carter stood at the window of her apartment, watching the morning sun stream across Cedar Falls. The view was the same, but everything else had changed, including the woman looking out the window. Gone was the hollow-eyed exhaustion that had defined her for so long. Her cheeks had color again, her shoulders stood straight with newfound confidence. Most importantly, the desperate edge of survival had been replaced by something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. In the kitchen, Lily and Mason sat at the table eating actual breakfast: scrambled eggs, toast with real butter, fresh orange juice. Not because it was a special occasion, but because the refrigerator was full and would stay full. They laughed as they ate, the carefree sound of children who no longer worried about where their next meal would come from. "Mommy, Phoenix is here," Lily called out, spotting the familiar motorcycle pulling up outside. Jasmine smiled. Phoenix had become a daily fixture in their lives, checking in not because he had to, but because he genuinely cared. Sometimes he brought small gifts, books for the children, coffee for Jasmine. More often he just brought his presence, the comfort of knowing someone was looking out for them. A knock at the door was followed by Phoenix's voice. "Morning, Carter family!" Mason squealed with delight and ran to the door. Over the past weeks, he'd overcome his initial shyness around the bikers, and now treated them like the uncles they'd become. "Uncle Phoenix," he shouted, throwing his small arms around the big man's legs. "Hey there, little man." Phoenix scooped Mason up effortlessly. "How's my favorite 3-year-old today?" "I had eggs for breakfast." "Real eggs?" Phoenix's eyes met Jasmine's over Mason's head, and they shared a moment of understanding. They both remembered those mornings when eggs had been an impossible luxury. "That's awesome, buddy." "What else is new?" "Mommy's not tired anymore," Lily observed with 6-year-old wisdom. "She smiles when she wakes up now." Phoenix set Mason down and turned to Jasmine. "Is that right? Smiling when you wake up?" Jasmine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Things are better, a lot better." Better was an understatement. The previous day, she'd done something she hadn't done in over 2 years. She'd quit one of her jobs. With the financial breathing room the Brotherhood had provided, she could afford to work just one full-time position instead of 2 part-time ones. For the first time since becoming a mother, she would be home for dinner every night, available for bedtime stories, present for the small moments that made up childhood. Kenny Murphy hadn't taken her resignation well, of course. He'd ranted about unreliable employees and people who don't appreciate opportunities, but his words had bounced off her like rain off leather. She no longer needed his approval or his abuse. She had options now, and dignity, and people who valued her worth. "There's something I want to show you," Phoenix said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. "This came to the clubhouse yesterday." Jasmine opened it to find a letter on official stationery from the Cedar Falls Community Center, along with several newspaper clippings. The letter was an invitation to speak at their annual fundraising dinner about the power of community and unexpected friendship. But it was the newspaper clippings that made her gasp. Headlines like "Local Motorcycle Club Transforms Family's Life" and "The Kindness That Started a Movement." There were photos of the Brotherhood delivering food to other families, organizing toy drives, and working with local charities. "Phoenix, what is this?" "Read the article," he said quietly. Jasmine's hands trembled as she read her own story, reflected back at her through a journalist's eyes. But it wasn't just her story anymore. It was bigger than that. The article described how word of her kindness had spread through the motorcycle community like wildfire, inspiring chapters across 3 states to organize similar outreach efforts. The single mother who shared her last cup of hot chocolate, to Jasmine read aloud, has become a symbol of the kindness that still exists in unexpected places. Her story has inspired the Iron Brotherhood and affiliated clubs to launch what they're calling the Phoenix Initiative, a coordinated effort to identify and support struggling families in their communities. She looked up at Phoenix with wide eyes. The Phoenix Initiative? Phoenix's cheeks reddened slightly. Dante thought it was fitting. The idea of rising from ashes, you know. Plus, I was the one who met you first. Phoenix, this says over 300 families have been helped so far. 314, as of yesterday, he confirmed. Chapters in Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas. All because of what you did that night. Jasmine sank into a chair, overwhelmed. I just gave you hot chocolate. You gave me hope, Phoenix corrected. And hope is contagious. The sound of multiple motorcycles approaching made them all look toward the window. It had become a familiar sound over the past weeks, members stopping by to check on the family that had started it all. But today was different. Today, the rumble seemed to go on forever. How many bikes is that? Lily asked, pressing her nose to the window. Phoenix grinned. About 150, I'd guess. Give or take. Jasmine's jaw dropped. 150? Why? Because today marks 3 weeks since you changed all our lives. Sandra's voice came from the doorway. She'd arrived with the group, carrying a large cake box and wearing a smile that could light up the whole building. Behind her came Dante, Marcus, and dozens of other familiar faces, the brotherhood that had become her extended family. But there were new faces too, riders from other chapters who'd traveled hundreds of miles just to meet the woman whose story had inspired their own acts of kindness. We wanted to celebrate, Dante explained, setting down a cooler that probably contained enough food for a small army. 3 weeks ago, you reminded us why we do this work. Since then, we've helped more families than we did in the previous 6 months combined. And it's not just us, Marcus added, pulling out his phone to show a video. Look at this. The video showed a motorcycle club in Dallas delivering groceries to an elderly veteran. Another showed bikers in Oklahoma building a wheelchair ramp for a disabled child. Scene after scene of leather-clad men and women performing acts of service and kindness. All inspired by you, Sandra said softly. All because you chose to be kind when the world had given you every reason not to be. Jasmine felt tears welling up, but they weren't tears of desperation or exhaustion anymore. They were tears of joy, of belonging, of realizing that her small act of kindness had rippled outward to touch hundreds of lives. There's something else, Phoenix said, exchanging glances with Dante. The community center isn't the only place that wants to hear your story, Dante explained. There's a publisher in Austin who's interested in turning this into a book. A production company in Los Angeles that wants to make a documentary. People want to know about the single mom who fed a hungry biker and started a movement. Jasmine shook her head in amazement. I never wanted to be famous. You're not famous, Sandra said with a smile. Your family. But your story belongs to everyone who's ever felt invisible, ever felt like their kindness doesn't matter. Outside, the rumble of 150 motorcycles filled the morning air. Neighbors who had once peered fearfully from behind curtains now waved from their windows. Mrs. Chen had put up a banner outside, her store reading, Welcome Iron Brotherhood. Even some of the local teenagers had gathered to admire the bikes and chat with the riders. The bikers had transformed not just Jasmine's life, but the entire neighborhood. Crime had dropped to almost nothing. Nobody was stupid enough to cause trouble, with the Brotherhood keeping watch. Mrs. Flores no longer worried about walking to the store after dark. Children played in the streets without fear. You know what the best part is? Lily said, tugging on Jasmine's shirt. What's that, baby girl? You're not scared anymore. You smile all the time now, and you hug us more. And you don't cry when you think we're not looking. Jasmine knelt down and pulled both her children into her arms, breathing in their sweet scent and marveling at how much had changed. They were right, she wasn't scared anymore. Not of eviction notices or empty refrigerators or bullying landlords. Not because all her problems had disappeared, but because she now faced them with an army of unlikely angels at her back. I love you both so much, she whispered into their hair. We love you too, Mommy, Mason said. And we love our new family too. Through the window, Jasmine could see the Brotherhood, organizing what looked like an impromptu block party. Someone had set up a sound system, others were grilling food, and children from the neighborhood were getting rides on the back of parked motorcycles. Phoenix appeared beside her, following her gaze. "Pretty amazing, isn't it? All this started because you chose kindness over fear." "No," Jasmine said quietly. "It started because you needed help, and I was lucky enough to be in a position to give it." "Jazz," Phoenix said seriously, "you shared your children's dinner with a stranger. You had nothing, and you gave anyway. That's not luck, that's character." She looked around at her transformed apartment, at her laughing children, at the family she'd gained through one simple act of humanity. The hot chocolate had cost her maybe $2. The ripple effects had been priceless. Sometimes, she said, thinking of her mother's words, the smallest gestures create the biggest changes. Outside, 150 motorcycles lined the streets of Cedar Falls, their riders celebrating not just one woman's kindness, but the power of community, the strength of chosen family, and the truth that goodness still existed in the world. And in apartment 204 on Maple Street, a single mother who had once counted crackers now counted blessings. Surrounded by children who would grow up, knowing that kindness always comes back around, sometimes thundering down the street on 150 motorcycles, carrying enough love to transform not just one life, but an entire community. The story of Jasmine Carter and Phoenix Williams had become legend in the Brotherhood. But more than that, it had become proof that sometimes the most unexpected angels wear leather jackets, and sometimes the greatest miracles begin with nothing more than a cup of hot chocolate shared between strangers who choose to see the humanity in each other. As the celebration continued outside, Jasmine made a promise to herself and her children. She would spend the rest of her life paying forward the kindness she'd been shown, because she now understood a truth that the Brotherhood had always known. Love shared multiplies, hope passed on never dies, and sometimes the most broken people become the strongest healers. The thunder of 150 motorcycles was just the beginning. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.